Namaste and welcome to Citti Media. My name is Ratnadeep Chakraborty and I am your host for today. I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Millerji, CEO of Gettr Application and former senior advisor to US President Donald Trump. Jason, a very warm namaste and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you today.
We're all aware that people as powerful as the former president of America has been cancelled in your country by big tech. And in our country, this has never happened. But what has happened is a very similar culture of cancelling people who are trying to put forward their perspective, which goes contrary to what the left purviewed in the last 7 decades in our country. Now, the difference is that we are no longer getting cancelled, but we are doing the cancelling. In fact, the tables have turned on the ones who were cancelling us before. Now, one of the most successful films made today is a tiny budgeted film and is becoming a blockbuster globally. Even when brands try to suppress our Dharmic or Hindu voices, they don't tend to do well because Hindus together get together and force the band to take that something which is not very Dharmic to take that down. Now, how is the landscape in your country, if I may ask you?
Well, I would say in the United States, the landscape is significantly different, where cancel culture remains all of the rage. In fact, just within the past 48 or 72 hours here in the United States, the Babylon Bee, which is a very politically satire comedy type spot, an account that's very popular, has been kicked off of Twitter because as a piece of political satire, they referred to the Surgeon General of the United States, who's a transgender woman, as their Man of the Year. And this led to their account being suspended until they go and delete that post and apologize. We see cancel culture every single day here in the United States. And just the fact that President Trump is kicked off of all the social media platforms, all the big tech social media platforms, but yet the Ayatollah, the Taliban, the political director for Hamas, Vladimir Putin, all remain active on Twitter. So there's definitely a double standard. And what I would warn my Indian friends about is, in advance of Prime Minister Modi's next election, it might not seem to be the case right now, but I would definitely be cautious that the social media big tech companies look to come in, and if there's an opportunity, try to supplant Prime Minister Modi, that they will look to use some of the same pressures that they've used against President Trump in 2020, or they're using against Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro in 2022. Because now for the big tech companies, it's all about shaping the world. It's not about protecting free speech or even growing their customer base. It's about shaping the world in their image.
I do agree. And at this point of time, even we have seen in India as well, quite a few of our leaders and political personalities have been either blocked or not been allowed to tweet for a certain period. And one of the most surprising things that we have seen in America is the lack of response from the conventional liberal after the ban of Donald Trump. So the conventional liberal, which comes out and protest when anything comes into the cancel culture or people get banned, why were they silent when President Trump was taken down from Twitter?
Yeah, this is a really smart observation, because in the United States over the past 50, 60, 70 years, the free speech debate has largely been defined as being something that is center-left. And whether it be the struggle for women's rights, the struggle for African-American rights, struggle for gay rights, these are all issues that were in the free speech space in particular, definitely viewed as being center-left. But now that the shoe is on the other foot and much of the free speech debate is happening on the center right, many of the traditional liberals, even the free speech advocates, are saying, well, you know what? It's not affecting us, so we're not going to worry about it. And so the place where we currently have these exchange of ideas, the digital town square, so to speak, are finding themselves, well, certain people get to use the town square, but other people don't get to if their ideology doesn't match up.
And certainly, all these three tech companies, the big three in Silicon, is controlling the freedom of free speech and expression throughout the world. And we have seen Nigeria being one of the countries which has officially banned Twitter. Now, I want to understand what led you to start the Gettr application. Is it because of the problematic statements of Twitter or the actions that they have been doing for the last few years?
Well, great question, because I don't come from a traditional position of advocating on free speech issues over the years. I've primarily worked in communications and CEO advisory type strategy and also US political campaigns, but I had a front row seat in 2020, which started off with the big tech companies working to silence people who dared to speak out against the CCP and with regards to COVID origins. By the way, it did come from a lab in Wuhan. Don't know if it was man-made or if it was traipsed out by a sloppy worker, but it did come from the lab in Wuhan. Or even in the summer of 2020, where people who criticized Dr. Anthony Fauci would find themselves in digital jail. And then, of course, the way that big tech colluded with big media to silence the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, for some of your viewers and listeners who might not be fully aware of this, in the closing days and weeks of the 2020 campaign, a Hunter Biden laptop surfaced. He had left it behind in a stupor at a computer repair shop, and it had a whole bunch of details on the family's foreign business dealings, primarily China and Ukraine. Critical things that really would give insight into what possible influences there might be over the Biden family. Of course, now we see just how much China and Ukraine are in the news. I think these are things Americans want to know. Then, of course, in early 2021, President Trump was completely deplatformed. So I knew at this point that we had to start something else. We had to have a free speech platform. But as I started doing my research, I realized this issue is going on all over the world, whether it's the aforementioned President Bolsonaro in Brazil or even in India, in UK. Heck, with regard to India, I would say that Twitter and Facebook are effectively now the digital East India company. And I don't know why these Silicon Valley billionaires think they get to dictate and determine free speech rights for all Indians, but they certainly think so.
Yeah, I do agree on certain aspects. And thank you so much for actually pointing that out, because the big techs have actually taken the freedom of free speech and expression to their account, and they get to decide what goes on there and what doesn't. And in fact, since you're starting your application and you're focusing a huge market base in India, I want to understand what's your perspective about a certain section of what we have seen. Global Hindus have actually undergone a blockage from the big tech startups. Or what do you know about India and the persecution of Hindus, in fact, in the country?
Yeah, another really good question, because obviously this is something the Indians are fully aware of, but my friends in the United States don't fully appreciate and respect. But the way that the big tech companies have been clamping down on Hindu nationalism, and they tried to make that sound as if it's a pejorative, as it's some sort of negative. But the fact of the matter is that Hindus should be very proud and free to practice their own religion. They should feel free to stand up against radical Islamic terrorism. And especially as you look at some of the areas, some of the border areas in particular, that India has, obviously with the terrorist attacks that India has faced over the years, the suffering that's happened from innocent Hindu Indians at the hands of Islamic terrorists. This is a very pointed issue for people in India. And the way that big tech has taken sides in this free speech debate, I think is really quite shameful. And so we see this, as I said, not just in India, the United States, we're seeing it in France, as we talk about issues such as migration and other Ukraine and spending type issues domestically. We see it in the UK, where I am at the moment, where we see an out of control Ofcom, or even the big tech themselves trying to come in and pick winners and losers in the free speech debate. But what we're trying to do with Gettr is make sure that there is a free speech safe space, so to speak, where your free speech rights are never going to be taken away by someone who doesn't even live in your country and doesn't understand your values at all.
And I do agree with you that there is a need for a safe and a free space for a lot of Hindus to come out and talk about persecution. In fact, historical fact of Hindus being persecuted have been taken down by Twitter or been blocked. And that is one of the reasons a lot of Hindus do not feel safe about big tech companies actually from the silicon. I want to come a little bit about the big tech emerging of these big technologies that has been impacting warfare. We have seen how the Ukrainian president has used social media or even TikTok as well, to create a campaign or PR campaign that has resulted in so many foreign fighters in the country. How do you see big tech actually impacting warfare? And I also want to ask a certain thing that a lot of social media has been facing this challenge of Islamic terrorists actually using social media platforms to recruit and radicalize more people, put out their videos. And I've been reading a Politico report which mentions about Gettr app also having a certain section, or in fact, some Islamists actually putting out their content. So, how safe is Gettr app actually from Islamic extremism?
Yeah, another good question. So early on in our platform, we were, since we're the freedom fighters, we've been attacked by everyone from the CCP in China to the radical Islamists with ISIS, all the way to the Russian bot farms. And part of the reason is because we stand for freedom and we're going to push for democratic ideals. In fact, even the flame in our logo represents fighting to bring democracy and freedom to places who don't have it. And so early on, we were attacked by ISIS and some of the terrorist groups. We've made sure to remove all of that content, so it is very safe. Our terms of service make it very clear that there's not going to be any terrorist activity, and any such content would be immediately removed. And in fact, we've taken the extra step of going through and identifying all possible terrorism or Muslim extremist handles that are on social media, whether it be the Ayatollah or the Taliban or Hamas, and make sure those are blocked on Gettr, so the same accounts cannot be created. And so we do not allow any terrorists or terrorist groups to join the Gettr platform. So we take that very seriously. With regard to the broader point, though, about social media and the impact now with regard to wars and even kinetic wars where we see, I still think that I understand that there's a lot of sensitivities with regard to Ukraine and Russia and the conflict that is going on at the moment. I do think that social media plays an important role. And I think that people can make the case, and we'll see how this plays out, that social media may be just as important, if not more important, than many of the kinetic conflicts that we see in the future, because it shows the rest of the world the real implications of war, whether it be the death, whether it be destruction, whether it be the harm of innocent people. And I think as people start to see these images, the stomach for armed conflict becomes much smaller. Now, I think that ultimately is a good thing. I respect all human life, and I want to make sure that we can preserve as much human life as possible. That's always harder to do in a very complicated world, but I do believe that social media can be a force for good in the future. I think that big tech has weighed in and started picking sides in too many of these conflicts, and that's wrong. But again, I still believe in the fundamental value of human beings to make the right decision.
And I also second you in that social media should be used as a force to improve our lives. And this brings me to actually a point about one of the famous personalities who has been promoting the alt-right platforms is not on your platform. So you have been his advisor as well. So why is President Trump not on the application? And I have another question that most of the alt-right platforms that have been released is catering to a similar pool of audience who wants free speech. So how does that competition actually turns out? Because most of them are catering to a similar kind of audience.
Yeah. So when we launched Gettr in July of 2021, I had two big goals in front of me. One is I needed to make sure that technology was really good. And that's one of the things I've strived to do, is make sure that Gettr is as good, if not better, than anything else the Silicon Valley has to put out there. And the reason for that is simple. We can get people to come and visit the site or to visit the platform to take a look. But if we want them to stay and enjoy it and make Gettr a regular part of their social media lives and put it on the front burner, so to speak, the tech has to be really good. People don't care if you've been around for 5 minutes or 5 years or 15 years. If the tech's not good, they're not going to stay. So on the first mission, we've accomplished that. And the tech is really good and it's turning heads and really impressing people. The second part is I did not want this to be an American echo chamber. I've worked tirelessly since we kicked off the last July to make sure that people from all over the world had the opportunity to use Gettr. And that was really for two reasons. One, so we'd have a multitude of ideas and voices coming across on the platform, and also to make sure that we had the ability then to go and scale as we started to get bigger and spread. If you do that just as an American only company, it's not going to work. So right now, 50% of our user base is from the US, 50% is from around the world. In fact, India is one of the 3 expansion countries for us this quarter, along with Colombia, as well as Japan, that we're adding on board and starting to put teams on the ground and making real efforts with. And so we want to have this real diversity of thought and opinion. Now, right now, much of the passion, much of the free speech debate is on the center right, because if you're a lefty, then you don't really have a reason to be upset with big tech. The fact that Twitter and Facebook are kicking off their users, you're probably happy with, but the pendulum is going to swing back. It's not always going to stay focused just on the center right. And so we're adding a lot of entertainers, athletes, people who have nothing to do with politics, people in comedy, people in acting, and people in sports. And so these are all people that we're bringing on. So it's not always politics first.
Yeah, and my question is, why is Mr. Trump not on your platform yet?
Yeah, so I worked for President Trump in 2016, where I was his lead spokesperson, as well as in 2020, where I was his senior advisor. And when I left working for him in June of 2021, I came to the president and made him a very good deal to join Gettr. Unfortunately, someone else came along and made an even better deal. Now, I do ultimately think that President Trump will join Gettr. I think that our platform has taken off in the fact that we're at 5 million users globally already, with about 2.5 million of those users in the US, the fastest ever growing social media platform in world history, even faster than President Trump's platform. I do think ultimately President Trump will join Gettr, but I'm not sure on the exact timing of that.
Yeah, and that's a very fascinating anecdote you mentioned. I want to understand a little more that when you're working with Mr. Trump around 2018, 2019, when you're soon approaching the elections, and we have seen how the big tech companies were actually trying to silence him. Was there a point where you went to Mr. Trump and said, I think I have an idea that I want to launch a alternate platform like Twitter, and would you be interested?
Yeah, I did not. I know that it was something that we discussed as a team several times, but no one ever took that initiative and stepped to do it because, quite frankly, I think a lot of us never thought that big tech would go quite that far, that maybe they might suspend or they might try to shadow ban the president, but they would never actually go and remove a sitting president of the United States. That was just a bridge too far. But they did it. And that's where I warn people everywhere I go as we approach these elections in 2022, whether it be in France, where the presidential election is next month, or in Colombia, where it's coming up in May, or even you look ahead to Japan, where they have elections in July, and then Brazil in October, US in November. Big tech is going to weigh in, and they're going to use their influence to pick winners and losers. And much of it is through their eyes of what is real news and what is fake news. Of course, in the eyes of the mainstream media and of big tech, that Hunter Biden laptop was fake news. It was Russian disinformation, as they used to say, except when it turns out that it's all true. Or when the fake news says that there was some sort of Russian interference in President Trump's election in 2016, we go through multiple years of congressional hearings and investigations going into it. And then at the end, it turns out there was nothing. And so every quote unquote fact checker has some sort of inherent bias from their own end. And that's where I get really nervous with big tech coming in and trying to determine who their fact checkers say can be news and not news, because they're biased as well.
Yeah, in fact, we do face the same problem here in India, and I do understand your point. I want to go a little bit about Mr. Trump's election. And you have been his close advisor. And a lot of our viewers might want to know that, will he be willing to contest the 2024 elections? And if he agrees to, do you think he will get the backing from the Republican Party?
I do think President Trump runs again in 2024. I do think he'll have the support of the Republican Party. Polling numbers right now show that the overwhelming majority of Republicans want President Trump to run again in 2024. And, brand new polling that's out today shows that President Trump would beat Joe Biden by 3 percentage points if they had a rematch today. Now, obviously, there's a long road to the coronation. It's a long time between now and 2024. And quite frankly, I don't think Joe Biden ends up being the Democratic nominee. I think they go with someone like a California governor, Gavin Newsom, someone who's younger, a little more energetic, someone who's maybe a little bit more progressive. Joe Biden has actually angered much of his progressive base because he has not been as aggressive they would have liked him to have been, especially while he had both the House and Senate control in the legislature. And so I do think that President Trump runs, but I don't think it'll be against Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating analysis. And since you mentioned President Biden at the moment, I want to ask you a question on that. President Biden comment a few days back, in fact, a couple of days back, on India's policy or confrontation with Russia being shaky when India wanted to import oil from Russia at a cheaper price. Has actually attracted a lot of criticism from the Indian section as well. How do you analyze this situation of President Biden criticizing India? And he mentioned about Quad as well, that all the allies except India have a strong opinion on Russia. Where do you see the India-US relation in the future and the future of Quad? Because India might not be very comfortable being the anti-China lobby in Quad.
Yeah, so I have a very strong anti-Russia sentiment as well, but I think that we're missing the big picture here, which is the counterbalance to China and the importance of India's positioning as not only the world's largest democracy, but also being adjacent, literally to China, and the strategic importance of the US-India relationship as we move forward. And really, there are two superpowers who are left right now. There's China and there's the United States. As we've seen with Russia, they're a first-tier rabble-rouser and troublemaker, but they have a third-tier checkbook. In fact, their economy is only about the same as that of the state of New York in the United States. And I think that India is going to be our most important partner, and we need to treat India as such. And so I think there's some battles that we need to pick and that make a difference, and some battles that we don't. I think that right now, I think Joe Biden and the United States need India as we look about the conflict with China, because what we see happening right now with Putin in Ukraine is just a warm up. When it becomes Xi in Taiwan, that's where the real action is going to start. And Xi is just sitting back and watching how the West reacts to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And so he can formulate what his strategy is going to be. And so I think Biden needs to be very smart with the India relationship, and needs to make sure that he values the country of India for the important strategic partner that it is.
And I do agree that Biden needs to understand and look at the bigger picture out here. But at the moment, do you think what President Biden is looking, or the world is looking at President Biden as a very weak leader? We saw what happened in Afghanistan. We are seeing what is happening with Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's important that you point out Afghanistan, because I believe that Putin's decision to invade Ukraine was made when Joe Biden fumbled the withdrawal of Afghanistan, the way that he handled that so poorly. And it really was disastrous. It let down a lot of our allies, not just our allies, say, in Western Europe and in the UK, but especially our allies there in Afghanistan, where you had individuals and families who'd worked with the United States for upwards of 20 years being completely abandoned. And there's no longer a sense of deterrence when it comes to the United States. That was one of the things that President Trump did so well, is that these foreign leaders were never able to quite figure him out or quite peg him. And they knew that he wouldn't hesitate, whether it be the missile strikes going into Syria, whether it be taking out Soleimani, that President Trump would not hesitate to take action when need be. And quite frankly, that deterrence, that ability there is what kept North Korea largely in check during the Trump administration. Obviously, President Trump, I think, did the best job of anyone of managing the very complicated relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But with Joe Biden, there's no sense of deterrence. In fact, I think most foreign leaders think that he just sleeps all day and has other people on his team do all the decision making for him. And so it's very depressing to see as an American. And I fundamentally believe that if there's a weak America, then there's a weak world. And so we need a strong America if we want to have strong democracy all over the globe.
Yeah, and indeed, stronger democracy is needed for the world. My last question to you is, a lot of viewers who might be watching this might want to go and experience the application. But as the CEO of the application, my question to you is the platform safe and the future of such platforms? Because we have seen certain platforms independent coming out there, but soon selling the platform to a big giant. So what are the future of independent platforms that are detached from the big three in Silicon Valley, and is Gettr safe?
Absolutely, Gettr is safe. And in fact, we will never sell out or compromise on our ideas or our values. We have that central mission of bringing freedom and democracy to places where it doesn't exist, of taking down the CCP, of making sure that people have their freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of financial destiny to go and chart their own futures. I do very much appreciate this decentralized model where we put more power in people's hands, where we empower people and give them that voice. That's fundamentally what separates us from any other creature that's on the planet, is our voice, our ability to communicate, our ability for self-expression. And as soon as we take that away, not only do we lose our uniqueness as human beings, but we also lose our uniqueness when it comes to democracies. And as soon as we start to erode those very key values, then next thing you know, we're an authoritarian state, just as bad as some of the other actors that you see even right next door in China. So our goal is to make sure we preserve free speech, that we continue to empower people. And I think Gettr, Gettr, is on the Apple Store, it's on the Google Play Store. I would invite you to come check it out. Fastest growing social media platform in history with 5 million users, is a place where the experience is going to be great. And it's a safe platform, and your freedom of speech will always be protected.
Well, I would like to thank you for actually introducing our viewers to the application. And thank you so much, Millerji, for taking your time and speaking to us, giving our audience a perspective of a very alternate platform, especially for us to allow or express ourselves to actually our opinion without getting cancelled or the fear of being taken down of the platform. I look forward to having more such conversation in the future with you and hosting you on our show. Namaste and have a great day ahead.
Thank you so much.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.